Celeste, this is a very unique podcast in the way that I want to congratulate you, but at the same time, I want to thank you in the way that you're giving us information we haven't had. It's amazing what you're unveiling here.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible to me when we first started digging into this that I had never heard of this killer, and most people have not heard of this killer. I mean, you think about say, Ted Bundy or the other serial killers who are basically famous for right or wrong. And there have been so many books. And yet this guy killed at least 6 young Black girls, all in the same area around D.C. And most people have never heard of him. Shocking to me. And it's also rare for somebody to kill that many people and never be caught.
Was it a trucker, a traveling salesperson? It had to be somebody who was associated with that highway.
Yeah, except it was probably somebody who lived in the neighborhood. And the reason that law enforcement thinks this is because he snatched these girls off the streets, the sidewalks, in broad daylight with people around. One girl was taken as she was leaving the grocery store. Her little bag of purchases was left on the sidewalk there. So this is somebody who did not who fit into these neighborhoods. He was familiar enough that he escaped notice, and he knew those streets and those neighborhoods well. But yeah, he was probably driving up and down those highways a lot.
One of the first steps of the mystery is, why didn't this hit the headlines? Why wasn't it on the front page, and why didn't the nation know about this? We knew what was going down in Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple things. One of them is kind of just chance, which is that this was happening while this was happening. Those huge protests in D.C. over the Vietnam War began, and law enforcement was very distracted by that. But the other reason is one that still plagues us, which is that these girls were Black. They came from Black neighborhoods, and they were in a lower socioeconomic status. And so I just don't think they were given the same amount of attention that other victims were.
You don't want to bring racism into it, but at the same time, you can't help but sit there, and look over your shoulder going, whoa. There's something going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not possible to not bring racism into this. When we were the former Metropolitan Police officer who it made this sort of her life's work to try to see if she can maintain attention on this and ultimately find the person responsible, Romaine Jenkins. We visited her house where she has just boxes and boxes of evidence collected. And going through the crime scene photos, I mean, they're incredibly upsetting, but you would see this tiny, fragile, Black body on the side of a highway surrounded by white men. Oh. All of the police officers were white. All of the crime scene investigators were white. Everybody there was a white man looking down on this young Black girl. And it is so striking when you see that. The other thing is that there was not trust between law enforcement, largely white law enforcement, and these Black neighborhoods at the time, and understandably so. And there still isn't. And that always complicates the effort to, bring children back home safely, but also to catch perpetrators.
Man, you describing that picture, and all of a sudden I go, wait a second, we're talking about a podcast here to where listeners are going to have to really get into the storyline and vision it themselves so that they can get their own interpretation. But you physically saw the photographs.
Yeah, we spent a long time going through these boxes. Some of them have evidence. She's got envelopes that have a tamper-proof seal on them that say, don't open because of chain of custody. She has the records of all the hundreds of interviews that law enforcement did with various suspects. Somebody in the neighborhood would say, oh, I saw this person. They would track down that person, and there's the record of that interview and what they said. There's a lot of information out there. And to a certain extent, that gives me hope. And the whole team has a little bit of hope because we know somebody knows something. There's still somebody around that knows something. And maybe we could still solve this.
That's why I was going to ask you if you guys are going to set up some sort of website where people can reach out in privacy or somehow, some way, get in there and say, hey, I know what's going on.
Yeah. And in fact, there's quite a reward if somebody does have a information that they want to share. First of all, they can share that anonymously, but there's a large reward available. If you have a tip and you want to reach out directly to Tenderfoot TV, you can email us. It's tips@tenderfoot.tv, exactly as it sounds. And both Tenderfoot and iHeart have contributed to make this a sizable reward. And like I said, someone somewhere knows something. They heard it at a barbecue. They heard it from a friend of a friend. And that's information that could really help bring these families closure that they deserve.
Yeah, see, when you're 50 years away from something that's taken place, you sit there and you wonder, is this just an urban legend story? But it's not. And that's what listeners need to understand, that your podcast is not something that somebody has, just kind of whipped out of their heart. This is an actual event, and many events that made this moment.
And the other thing is this is one thing that really struck me as we were investigating this. Number one, it took them, I don't think they realized the killers were connected until the fourth victim.
Really?
Right? It took them a very, very long time. I mean, this is a period of time when we didn't even have the phrase serial killer, right? They called them pattern killers at the time. They didn't really understand a murderer that would kill unrelated people, not for personal reasons, right, but because, and so, that's the thing for me, is that if they had brought the attention to these killings at the time, if they had gotten the community involved the way they should, if they've gotten the media involved the way they should, they might have been able to keep those other girls safe.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that's true today. It's like, and you listen to, we spoke to a number of the family members, and they are just still, it may be 50 years later, but that loss just still rips them apart.
Yeah, I get that, because my wife's mother was murdered, and to this day, I mean, it's just it feels like it just happened yesterday.
Yeah, that's a wound that doesn't heal, and I've never lost somebody to violence in my life in that way, and so I can't speak personally, but the families themselves say that they could get some relief if they got some measure of justice. But to feel like these young lives were cut short, I mean, age 10, Errol, age 10, and everyone's forgotten them.
Well, you should see my notes here, because that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure, say their name. Carol, Darlene, Brenda, I mean, you've got, Brenda Woodward, Diane Williams. I mean, and then a name I can't even pronounce. Is it Nemoshima?
Ninamosha.
Oh my God. So say their name so that we can put it out there in the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine Carol, the very first one that was killed, was a twin. And we spoke with her twin sister, and, this has damaged and rerouted her life.
Wow.
This just completely changed the course of her life. Again, it's hard to imagine what that would be like, to lose a twin, to have a twin and then lose a twin that way. But they deserve to be remembered. Yeah. And this is one of the things that we hope this podcast does, is to get people to say their names, remember these girls, remember these lives cut short, but also really re-examine the things that prevented us from protecting these girls. And many of these things are still a problem today.
Wow. Going back 50 years, I'm going to say something here that our probably listeners won't understand what it is, but you got to dig into it. Microfilm. Did you get to go play with that?
So we didn't go through all of the microfilm, mostly because we weren't allowed to take it out of Romaine's house. Understandably, she's very protective of it. Which is totally fine. But there's a lot of it. There is a lot of it. She went to all these, there was a lot of different law enforcement agencies involved. Some of the murders happened within the D.C. Limits, which would have been the Metropolitan Police. Some of them were in Prince George's County, and then the FBI stepped in. And so she had to go to each of these individual law enforcement agencies and ask them if she could get the evidence. She wanted to preserve it. And there's a lot of old stuff, all these very old, I don't know if you've ever held like a 1970s photo, and it's on that thick photo paper with the kind of crinkly edges.
Oh, yeah.
Many of those, the microfiche, as you said, if we could get the kind of concerted attention onto this case. And, frankly, from one of the interviews that I've done, we've already gotten at least one tip from somebody who says they know something and they want to share it anonymously. So We just need to shake this loose.
And it starts with conversation like we're doing today. And this conversation then starts growing across the country because it might be somebody who's in Arizona that was living in D.C. at that time. That's what's great about what you're doing here, Celeste.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what's great about having, the larger companies like iHeartRadio and Tenderfoot TV. It's so great to have Bar Mitzvah, all of these companies that can really bring the national attention to it, because exactly as you say, we don't know where the people are. That person who was standing at a community event and overheard something, or attended a barbecue with their uncle and then went home to Oregon or wherever, right? Yeah. We don't know where they are, but we want to reach them. But,
one of the things that I've learned through the podcast, this guy was a real butt, because, he would call the homes of those that he killed. Who does that kind of stuff outside of an insane man?
He absolutely tortured these families. He had the girl call home and ask for her mother, and she's standing in the home of the man who was about to murder her, and on the phone, asking for her mother, saying, "I'm okay. I'm at this white man's house." Imagine. I can't imagine. I keep saying that, but that was my experience throughout the entire investigation for this podcast. That, these poor families who were desperate to get their children home safely would receive these phone calls saying, I have her and you won't see her again. He left a note on one of the girls that was taunting the police. One of the papers at that time had given him the moniker of Freeway Phantom because he left their bodies by the side of these roads. And he obviously enjoyed it because that's how he signed his note. And much like Jack the Ripper did, he left this note to taunt the police. Jack the Ripper left notes saying, "Catch me if you can." Right. And that's essentially what his note said. So yeah, this guy took really, really sick pleasure in ending these lives. He sometimes kept them at his house overnight, fed them, bathed them.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Now, one of the things that listeners need to learn about you is that you're also working with iHeart as well as your production company to turn this into a series. Because now if you can do that, we're gonna be able to visually even get into this story even more.
Absolutely. And, to unite, the podcast series, the whole production team has done an incredible job, but to then be able to expand it even further so that people can see these crime scene photos, so they can see these spots in the photo from the freeways, they can see these neighborhoods, they can see these girls' faces. You look at the photos of these girls, often there's their school photo, right? These are not young women who had portrait photos taken. They hadn't had all the major events in their lives where you can see photos from their wedding. Yeah. Right. These are their school photos, their grade school photos. And I think if our audience starts to see those, that might even spread it even further and begin to maybe fill in the blanks, the so many blanks in this story.
Mm-hmm. One person that we haven't talked about is Jay Ellis. To create with him, how about that?
Yeah, it's exciting. And, it's exciting when there's somebody who has that kind of reach and that kind of recognition, who recognizes the importance of this story and is willing to invest in it in a way where they just support it all the way along the line. That's an incredible thing. And I absolute props to him for making this something he cares about. It's not common among celebrities, but he has been so supportive. He understood the import of this case. He also understood the relevance to today immediately and has really, put his money where his mouth is.
Wow. Now, let's talk about you personally. You can't dig into a story as big as this and not let it get in there and fester your heart. Because, how are you staying protected from ghosts knocking on your shoulder?
That's a great question. During the heaviest part of the investigation of this, when I was reading textbooks on the mind of a serial killer, et cetera, it sticks with you. Everybody has their own coping mechanisms. Mine is that I only read fictional books in my free time. If I need a break, I watch a comedy. You know, I'll watch old episodes of Parks and Rec or something. And I take my dog for really, really long walks. I mean, you just have to be able to step away and not obsessively go through all of the information and read through the crime scene reports again, which part of you is so tempted to do.
Yeah.
But it's you know, it would be one thing, Errol, if this story was like, oh, that happened in the past and everything is so much better now and this would never happen again. But that's one of the other things that makes this kind of a burden on your heart, is that we haven't fixed some of these things that we need to fix in order to keep these girls safe, keep everybody safe, but especially, you know, these young lives. They needed our protection and they didn't get it.
Well, even today, we're trying to figure out how to protect those kids, because I mean, it's like, and I don't know, I can edit this out if it's too much, but you know, serial killers have changed. Now they call them mass shooters. They're still serial killers.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, there's lots of different reasons for that, you know, partly the weaponry itself.
Yeah.
But you are correct. You know, I think it's a good parallel, especially to this extent, that I think some of the reasons why people have forgotten these girls, and I'm going to say their names again, Carolyn, Darlene, and Brenda, and then Moshe and Brenda and Diane, the reasons they've forgotten them is because we have this story in our heads, right? That there's a certain amount of violence against the innocent that is just inevitable and therefore acceptable.
Wow. Now, where can people go to get in touch with you, because they need to know now that they've heard the story and they're going to jump into this on iHeartRadio, Freeway Phantom, that they're going to want to know, where can I go?
So they can listen to the podcast anywhere that they get their podcasts.
Yep.
If they have a tip, there is a sizable award that Tenderfoot TV and iHeartMedia have contributed to at this point. And if you have a tip and you want to reach out directly and anonymously to Tenderfoot TV, email us. It's tips@tenderfoot.tv.
Do you realize that 5-10 years ago, none of this was ever possible? I mean, people didn't invest in podcasts, and now, you know, I mean, this is not like television or doing terrestrial radio. This is an opportunity to share a story and to reach people consistently. It doesn't go away. They can come back to it. They can come back to it all the time.
And the investment is a really important part of what you just said, too, because, you know, we commissioned a brand new profile of this killer, a profile that has never been done, a scientific profile of the killer for the first time we have. And so, yeah, it makes a difference when production companies, in this case, Tenderfoot TV, Black Bar Mitzvah, and iHeart, really put the resources behind it to make this an in-depth investigation as it needs to be. This isn't, you know, just people chatting about information they found on the web. As you say, this attention to podcast means we were able to marshal resources to really make this the kind of investigation that it needed to be. And that's a good thing.
What did you learn from this journey?
I think I learned a lot about the nuanced relationship between law enforcement agencies. Mm-hmm. You know, it's so easy to give my opinion on law enforcement and criminal justice, my mostly uninformed opinion. But then you start to dig into why it's so difficult to address violence, and you realize it's more complicated than you think. I think I also learned a lot more about how vulnerable some neighborhoods are and how that vulnerability changes according to people's status.
Wow.
According not just to their race, their gender, but their socioeconomic status as well.
Wow. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always, always, always going to be open for you.
I really appreciate that, Era. Thanks so much.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
Thanks. You too.